I'm so thrilled that it changed your life. I think that that has been my experience, and it was very surprising to me when I started working with speakers. I thought what I was going to be doing was helping them to become better communicators and to better champion their ideas, which is incredibly important and would have been incredibly rewarding on its own. But what I found is consistently and more often than not, when people become more confident and compelling speakers, it changes so many aspects of their lives. It's transformative. People then get a renewed or sometimes a first time sense of confidence about who they are, about why they're in the world, about their knowledge and their skills and their ability to have a unique perspective on something that other people need to hear. Maybe that's one other person in the world, maybe it's a million, but they have a totally new attitude.
Hello, I am John Brink, and we are podcasting on the Brink from downtown Prince George, British Columbia, Canada. And for all those people watching us from around the world, they say, we know where Canada is, and we think British Columbia is on the west coast, right? Right. And we know a city in British Columbia is called Vancouver. Yes, and we are 500 miles north of Vancouver. Or for our European friends, 800 kilometers. That puts us in the middle of British Columbia, north-south, east-west, right in the center. So British Columbia, big province. Today, we have a very, very special guest. Her name is Juanita Wheeler, and she is a public speaking coach, a CEO, and a head of Curation and TEDxBrisbane, with over 20 years of experience across multiple continents. She has had the privilege of coaching more than 100 TED speakers, and in addition, she holds 3 master degrees, including 2 in business and 1 in social change leadership. Juanita, that's a long, and I can go on and on and on. Welcome to the show, Juanita.
Thank you so much, John. It's an absolute delight to be here.
So tell us a bit about yourself. From where are you from, which area, and then your training is very, very interesting because it's all about communication, communication skills, and other things reflecting around it, including you are very, very active in TED, T-E-D, and you can tell us a bit about that as well as we go forward. But first, tell us about yourself. Where were you born, your training, your education, and then how did you get into communications and everything surrounding it?
Thanks, John. So I was born, first of all, I'm coming to you today from Brisbane in the state of Queensland in Australia. So for those of
Beautiful.
you not familiar with Australia, we are sort of halfway on the east coast, halfway down the length of Australia, about an hour and a half flight north of Sydney. But you can drive 14 hours north and you would still be in the state of Queensland. And I know you always say that British Columbia is the most beautiful place in the world, and I'll let you have that, but we're pretty lovely here too. I was originally born still in the state of Queensland, but in North Queensland, and I moved to Brisbane when I was about 3. My childhood was a bit complex. It was there was abuse and neglect, and so those were challenges that I needed to overcome. And it was only in recent years that I've really come to appreciate that my passion for communication and for people having their voice heard really stems all the way back to me trying to communicate that I was in trouble and needing help and not having my own voice heard. So it's something, when you talk about, and I've heard you speak about it numerous times, talking about, setting the foundation, that your childhood and your experiences set the foundation for where you would go and what you would spend your career and your life doing. I have a very similar feel and story. So once I left high school, and then I went on and I did an undergraduate degree. It was in arts. Most fabulous degree. It didn't teach me what to think, but how to think,
Yeah.
and which was fantastic. And I spent most of my focus actually studying feminist revolutionaries throughout European history, because clearly that was going to get me a job.
Right.
I was a teen mum as well. I met my husband. We've now been together for 31 fabulous years.
Wow.
But so I was then juggling study with being a mum to one and then subsequently three kids. I was working in a startup in Brisbane. Then I ended up working for a multinational. I did my first master's, which was an executive MBA, because I realized I needed to have, or it was important for some people that I have the piece of paper. I was doing all of this great entrepreneurial work. I was negotiating international distribution deals, but I didn't have the piece of paper.
Right.
So I went and I did that. It was still very important in that particular field, and that was great. And then I left that organization in 2011. There's a bit of a story about that,
Wow.
but I decided I wanted to do something different. I
Right.
had fallen out of love with my job. I was working for biotech, and I thought I want to really make a difference. And so I did a pendulum swing, and I started my own company, which I called Full and Frank because I am, and comprehensive but blunt wasn't as catchy. And so I then did a second master's, majoring in business, but with a focus on philanthropy and nonprofit studies, because I wanted to make sure that I could serve people, whether they were in business or social enterprise or in the not for profit sector. And then my final third master's was in social change leadership, in part because I think it's incredibly important that all of us have the opportunity to leave the world a better place than how we arrived. And
Exactly.
so I'm very committed at understanding all the different ways we can do that.
So, what I find interesting about you, among many things, Juanita, is that you're a very good communicator. That already was obvious to me because of your credentials, but also now interacting with you. Have you always been so good at communication, or what I believe self confidence in presenting yourself?
Absolutely not, which is in part what drives me. I think, like a lot of children who've experienced abuse and neglect, I was not um, very confident. I am an extreme introvert by nature. So, whereas my children, like two of my children, are extreme extroverts, so they love being with people and entertaining, and I think I love humans, but that to me is exhausting. So, um, no, I wasn't very good at. I've always been extremely good at articulating and communicating in writing. So I found myself trying to make compelling cases in writing. I would put proposals for my ideas. I would put forward documents, and they were great. They were really, if I say so myself, extraordinarily compelling and well written. But what I would find is I would get into a room, a meeting room, a conference room, or a sidebar discussion with people in business where decisions are being made. And I discovered that the person who was, more gregarious, more charismatic, who was prepared to vocally champion their idea in a discussion, in a conversation, in a compelling way, their ideas were going to get taken up, even if those ideas weren't quite as good as the ideas that I had in writing. And so the penny dropped that, okay, if I am serious and passionate about my ideas, about the things that I want to say, then I'm going to have to suck it up, get over the fear of public speaking and being an introvert, and work out how to do it. And being a study nerd and a data nerd, I said, well, I need to find a way for people who are like me, who don't love the stage necessarily, to do it, and to find a way to do it that's based on data and evidence, neuroscience, behavioral economics, behavioral psychology, rather than just stick your hands here and modulate your voice in this way.
So that's what you did. And
Yes, I used myself as a guinea pig for about 10 to 20 years until I found what worked.
so, why did it take so long?
Well, it probably didn't take so long. Took so long for me to finesse it and refine it to the level where I was really happy to go and share it with the world. Prior to that, I mean, it took a while for me to read everything I could get my hands on. And I was reading academic journals, I was looking at research papers, I was, understanding the neuroscience of how do the brain hemispheres work, what makes for a compelling piece of oratory, what, makes people first of all listen and then act, because there's a big difference, and you would know, I know you do a lot of public speaking. There's a big difference between public speaking where you want people to enjoy it and feel entertained and go, that was a great joke, and they laugh and they go, that was a great speech, and that's wonderful and it absolutely has an important purpose. But the type of public speaking that I was interested in was persuasive speaking, where at the end of you speaking, someone is saying yes, whether that's to a business deal, to buying a new product, to signing a contract, to whatever that is, changing a piece of legislation. It didn't really matter, but it was about how do you persuade people through speaking to say yes.
Making the
So
case.
making the case in a way that is very compelling. So I did it for myself, and I refined and refined and refined. And what I found is in my professional life, people were starting to say to me, hey, that was great. Can you teach me how to do that? So while I was still working, that became part of what I would do. I was mentoring and supporting people I was working with. And that actually became my favorite part of my work, because when other people won, you won. And then around that time I became involved in TED and TEDx, specifically TEDxBrisbane. First of all, I just went and attended a local TEDx event. I was very excited because I
Maybe,
love TED Talks.
maybe just share with our listeners from around the world, what is TED all about?
Great question. So TED, and I don't want to sound like I'm going back to the dawn of time. I
No,
promise
no.
it'll be quick.
Yeah.
But TED originally started in 1984 in America. And the conference was TED. The letters of TED stood for Technology, Entertainment, and Design. And in 1984, it was a conference, initially thought it would be a one-off, and it drew people together who were looking at the exciting intersections at the time between those fields. So you had people, there's some wonderful video footage of TED 2, which was the second one. And there were people looking, for example, at a MacBook icon, a screen where they had, wasn't MacBook, but a computer screen, where for the very first time they had a trash bin icon instead of having to tell the computer send to trash. And people's minds were blown. And then you saw the very early onset of virtual reality and other things. So they were looking at how video games and technology and entertainment and design all came together. And over the years, they decided to do it again and again. And very quickly, they realized that people wanted to talk about issues and topics. And these people who are speaking are leaders in the field. They are best and brightest. They are the thought leaders, the change makers, the cream of the crop. And they come to TED and they share ideas. The format is it has to be less than 18 minutes. So you can't waffle on for an hour. It's very short, very punchy. What is your idea worth spreading that will have a positive impact on the world? So TED went on for a number of years. It was very popular. There were multiple iterations. Originally, the conference itself, and anyone who attended the conference got a copy of a DVD of the talks, but it didn't go out publicly. And then later on, there was a change of leadership. Chris Anderson, the current curator, came in, and he applied a very different, and some would say radical model, where he said, there's this new thing called YouTube. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a selection of our talks that people paid to come and see at this very exclusive and fabulous conference, and we're going to put them out into the world for free. There's a really great TED talk that you can see that Chris Anderson himself gave, I would argue, to calm down the audience at the TED conference that year when they made the announcement, because there was clearly a sense that the sky was falling. if you have all of this amazing content, why on earth would you give it away for free? This will be the end of TED, which of course is not what happened. It got out onto
Just
YouTube
the
and
opposite.
the popularity exploded. And part of that insane popularity was that then people said, you need to come to my city and bring TED to my city. And it was still a small team. It had nonprofit status. They were running out of New York, and they're like, we can't possibly do that. But that's when the concept of TEDx came up. So where TED is the top level of the TED family, TEDx is the community-led, boots on the ground realization of the TED and TEDx mission, which is basically they give a license to individuals within a community. So I have the license for TEDxBrisbane, for my capital city, and you have a set of rules that you need to follow and guidelines and principles and values. But you get to go and then put on TED-style events in your city that champion the ideas that either your city needs to hear or that are coming from your city that the world needs to know about. So there are over 3,000 TEDx events every year. There have been so many millions and millions of views globally, but our TEDxBrisbane talks alone, just our talks, have been viewed over 33 million times.
Wow.
So we are celebrating the thinkers, leaders, game changers, researchers, authors from our city and sending those ideas to the world.
And now it's all over the world, right? Like I'm originally from Holland, and I know they have it there as well. Very, very popular, very thought after, and it's kind of an honor to be asked to make a presentation on TEDx, right?
Absolutely, it's a real privilege to be asked to step into the red circle that appears on TEDx stages, because every curator, every person who's a licensee are being asked to contribute the best ideas that they can find to this global library of great ideas worth spreading. And again, TED recently this year has changed their own tagline. It's historically since its inception been ideas worth spreading. And this year, and I'm very excited about it, they've changed the tagline to ideas change everything. And I'm incredibly passionate and excited about that because I do believe that the best ideas are the ones that have the potential for great good and great impact. And so it is a wonderful forum. And yes, it's a real privilege to get onto a TEDx stage and be invited to give a TEDx talk. But the thing I particularly love is a real aspect of the platform is that it's not for traditional motivational speakers or people who do lots and lots of public speaking. One of the core values and principles of TEDx is that you should be finding people in your community or in the world who have a brilliant idea that most people have. They're not a household name. People don't know who they are. So one of the great parts about my role at TEDx is I get to go into, science labs and cubicles and drag people out who have just been sitting working with data or research or, in their company, and no one knows about this amazing work that they're doing, and then we put them on a global stage. I just had one of our speakers just had his talk launched this morning, a researcher at Griffith University here in Brisbane called Dr. David Riley. And his work was it's incredibly interesting. It's about why men overestimate their IQ and women underestimate their IQ and the implications this has in the workplace, in schools, and for children and as parents. And it's so important that people hear this message. But David won't mind me saying that we had to virtually drag him kicking and screaming to the stage because public speaking is not his realm of experience or where he feels comfortable. But he did a magnificent job. And the thing we told David that I tell all my speakers is if you are truly passionate and believe in your idea, then you're going to have to do what I did, suck it up, and go out there and champion it because no one is going to be able to champion it as well as you can.
Exactly. And so for a lot of them, it puts them into a position they have never been before because standing in that red circle or being the center of attention, you could have 2, 3, 4, 500 people there watching him potentially. So it's
Absolutely.
an intimidating environment for people that are not used to it, and even the ones that are, like I am and you are, we always have a sense of anxiety because that's a requirement. If you want to do a good job, you need to have that feeling just before you go on of that sense of anxiety that will then excel you to where you need to be.
Absolutely. So I talk about healthy nerves. It's good to have a little bit of healthy nerves before you go on. Healthy nerves says you care about this. Healthy nerves says the thing I'm about to talk to you about and the thing I'm about to do is important and I want to do a good job. And
Exactly.
healthy nerves gives you that little push of adrenaline that's going to lift you and
Yeah.
help you really deliver well. I get very, very nervous and probably don't end up working with anybody who doesn't get just a little bit nervous before they speak. It comes across as complacency and you know, it's kind of like you're phoning it in. You want to have a little bit of healthy nerves because it says you're still passionate about it. It's exciting. You want to do it really well and you care. So healthy nerves is great. What we always work to make sure that we overcome, and we work with our TEDx speakers, for example, for typically 4 to 5 months before they make it on stage. It's a
Right.
very long, comprehensive training program, the same
Right.
one that I do with my individuals that I coach outside of TEDx. But what we want to do is get rid of the unhealthy anxiety because, if it's not going to help to have that level of anxiety, we need to get rid of it. The
Yeah.
healthy nerves, you want some of that.
Yeah. That's good. And that makes you excel to, being a good presenter. So now what you do mainly is your focus is mainly on presenting, coaching, and issues relating to becoming good communicators, I believe.
Yes, absolutely. Prior to COVID, actually, I was still working on, and this was part of my work, but I was still taking jobs and doing work on what I had historically done for large multinational corporates. So I was doing strategic planning, strategic communications, some negotiations and oversight of supporting mergers and acquisitions. But I'd done that for so long and it wasn't the part of my work that really filled me with passion and joy. The part of my job that I loved the best was when people brought me in to help them communicate it. So whether that was speaking to potential investors or shareholders or learning how to speak to their employees and their teams to actually get them excited and inspired and to grow culture, or whether they were researchers and they needed to go and share this new research. And researchers can really struggle with that because research by its nature is very insular. You are working on your own, perhaps with a very small team in a lab or in a cubicle or a library, and then suddenly you come up with this amazing answer or solution or idea, and it's tested. And having had this very solo, very insular experience, now you ask them, now get on a stage in some format and start championing this to everybody. And unfortunately, often that doesn't happen,
No.
which is how you end up with all of these brilliant ideas sitting on shelves or
Yeah.
in theses, or even with business people, they'll have a brilliant idea, but if they are introverted like I was and am, or they were nervous about how to communicate it well, then often there are these great ideas that the world needs that are either sitting in somebody's shower or their lounge room or their cubicle and they never get out into the world. And I think the only thing worse than not telling anybody because you're concerned about public speaking is when they actually go and try to do it without any help and they do a really bad job, because it's very, very difficult to pull back an idea and convince somebody it's good if you've not delivered it in a way that does it justice. I always say to people, bad presentations are the place where good ideas go to die. So
Yeah.
it's really important, if you have a great idea, to go and present it and champion it in a way that does it justice. So that's become absolutely the focus of my work, because it is so essential. It doesn't matter how good your idea is, or your product, or your service. You can't go out and champion it through one-on-one conversations, or in boardrooms, or to a theatre of 2,000 people, then you're not going to be able to do it justice.
No, and that takes experience, because to be a good presenter, you have to develop skill sets. And the way to get that is to get into an environment, either the one you chose for you to become a good presenter, or in some form or fashion. So, just want to tell you a little bit about myself and my background. I'm somewhat substantially like you. I'm an introvert, not an extrovert. Even now, although to a lot of people they think I am an extrovert because I'm a good presenter and I'm a good writer, but I'm a loner a lot of times. I like it. I feel comfortable in that environment. So I'm not seeking out to find places to interact, but I seek out areas where I can be alone in a lot of cases, and so that works for me, and that works for myself, my wife. We have a place actually in North Saanich that is in the southern part of British Columbia, close to Victoria, and it gets me away from my busy life in northern BC, and I kind of blend in there. Nobody really knows me, and I can do the things that I like to do together with my life and with our horses and all of those kind of things. So, but to take you back a bit to, I was born in 1940, November the 1st, actually 1940. So in the next 2 weeks, I will be 84. 84 years.
Congratulations.
84 years young, I say. And so obviously things were difficult during the Second World War, and I still remember the time that my mom and dad, they got married when they were 38 years old, and they were in 1938, 2 years before the war started, and they were in love, and my dad had a job at a lumber company, and they had a house, not their own, but they were renting, and fairly quickly had first a boy, and then followed the following year with a girl. So they were happiest people in the world. And then what happened is Hitler decided to invade Europe and put it under his control, the Second World War. And my dad then, in May or April of 1940, was called into the Dutch army. And the last time that they heard from him is when he was seen in Rotterdam just before they bombed it, and thousands of people died. And for 5 years they wouldn't know if he lived or died. And so my mom then was pregnant with me and with her little boy and the little daughter. She was on her own, and she would be on her own for the next 5 years until the war ended. And the first thing that I remember when I was 3 years old, three and a half, was the sound of bombers overhead, hundreds of bombers. And we lived in the northeastern part of Holland, within 10 or 15 minutes from the German border. And so I still remember the sound of hundreds of bombers. It's still a sound that still is with me today, and I likely will never hear it again. But and my mom would take us outside at nights, in particular, when the bombers were overhead, not to look at them, but she felt safer outside than inside. And in the distance we see, across the border, we saw cities in northwestern part of Germany, close to Holland. We saw cities, the skies would be red after they bombed them. Bremen, Hamburg, Wilhelmshaven, all those areas, Kiel, where there was factories that built infrastructure for the war. And then the next thing that I remember was the liberation of Holland by the Canadian Army. And we were liberated by them April the 12th, 1945. And it made such an impression on me that I always knew I would go to the land of my heroes, Canada. And so it took me a while. I was going to go when I was 17, but then was drafted into the Dutch Air Force. And then I finally went when I was 23. I emigrated to Canada. That was my dream. The other dream that I had is to build my own lumber mill, because my dad was, after he came back from the war, and he came back after they were liberated, he again worked in the lumber industry, and I developed this attachment to lumber that became my dream. I wanted to become a lumberman. Now, academically, I was not a success story. I failed grade 3. I failed grade 7 3 times, and they said, what we're going to do with this guy? And some people said, well, send him to the mentally challenged school. And they said, no, we're not going to do that. And they said, let's find him a job so he can become a craftsman or develop the skill set. And so they sent me at 13 to a furniture factory. And I worked in the furniture factory. I loved it. And then at nights I would go to the college to become a furniture maker. So I did that, and then I was drafted into the Dutch Air Force for 2 years. Then again, after that, again worked in the lumber, and then decided kids can be hard on each other, right? So when I failed grade 7 3 times, a lot of my friends that went on to college and university were no longer really, I became a laborer. Today I'm proud of that, but then it was kind of looked down on, and they said he's dumb, he's stupid, all the stuff, and so, but I was always an optimist, even then, lived in my own little world, and so I had to start anew, because I knew I was just as smart as the other guys and girls, and then it even became more of a reason for me to leave, to go to Canada and start from nothing, right from the beginning, with the dream to build a lumber mill. So I left when I was 23, took 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, very little money, and got a plane from Amsterdam to Montreal, got off the plane, took the train across Canada, 4 days, 5 nights. Oh my God, that's a long way. And arrived in Vancouver, went to the immigration department there, and I couldn't speak English, and didn't know soul, didn't have a job, and fortunately there was a German fellow there, and I could speak some German, so I told him I wanted to build a lumber mill. He said, go to Prince George, 500 miles north. They're building mills, and it's a boom town, and so that's what I did. I went to Prince George with my suitcase, 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, and on the Greyhound. And I can still see where the Greyhound station was, right a couple of blocks away from here. And I came off the bus, couldn't speak language, didn't know soul, didn't have a job, but I had my suitcase, 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, and I counted my money at least 3 times. I had $25.47. And so that's what I did. And so I needed a job right away. And so I went to the immigration department, and fortunately there was a fellow that could speak some Dutch, and he found me a job, cleanup man, in one of the mills. So that same evening I went to the lumber mill and started as a cleanup man with my suit on and broom, and everybody kind of looked at me. They thought, this guy is crazy. Look at him with a white shirt on and a tie. And anyway, I had a plan, and nothing was going to change me. So after I had been there for a couple of months already, fairly quickly I learned the language. Then I was very industrious. I always got to work early, always made sure that my workplace was nice and clean. I became a supervisor, and within a year I was a superintendent of one of the larger mills here. And then even that didn't go fast enough for me because I wanted to build a lumber mill. And I had to go all the way to the Yukon Territory, which is right next to Alaska. We are 500 miles north of Vancouver. That's 1,000 miles north of Vancouver. And in the wintertime, oh my God, it gets so cold. I saw it 62 below zero. And I was there for about 5 years. Then that was not my future in my mind. So I left there virtually with nothing, went back to Prince George, again became a superintendent of one of the mills, was fairly successful, and then started a lumber company that ended up to be the Brink group of companies, but there was a lumber company first. And everybody said to me, "You're so successful." But I didn't feel that way, even not then. And one of the challenges that I had, I was not a good communicator. And I could communicate in my own little group as the employees that I had, but anything beyond that did not work for me. And I had self-confidence. And then somebody said to me, ex-sister-in-law actually, she said, "I want you to go with me to Toastmasters." I said, "Toastmasters? What is that all about?" She said, "It's about communications. And you acquire," and I said, "Are you going to ask me any questions?" She said, "No. You just can't go there and you sit down and you watch what they are doing." And so I did that. And then in the middle of the meeting, somebody said to me, "Hey, John, tell us all about you." And I said, "Oh my God, I'll never go back here." But I did. I stayed there for 10 years. I became a distinguished Toastmaster, which is the highest level of Toastmasters. And I'm sure you're familiar with it, is that in North America in particular, there probably, as we speak, are 450, 500 Toastmaster clubs. And all the smaller communities, including Prince George, actually has probably 4 or 5 clubs. And maybe about 20 individuals, and they all interact in Toastmasters. And it's not only about speaking, but what they teach you, first and foremost, to become a good listener. The second one they teach you is to be good on your feet and to articulate answers to questions or issues. And then the other part is evaluating the other speakers or presenters in some form, meaning to become a good evaluator, point out some good areas, some of the ones that are maybe a little bit marginal, and then areas for improvement, but always on the positive notes. And so that it encourages, and then also structurally, they have certain topics they speak on, and then gradually you work your way up from the beginning, higher and higher and higher, and the highest level in Toastmaster is a distinguished Toastmaster. Of the 10 million people that have probably been part of Toastmasters in Europe, I presume in Australia as well, I'm not sure, you will tell us, I'm sure, is that probably less than 1% of them go to the hot level of becoming distinguished Toastmasters because of whatever somebody's needs is to feel more comfortable about being a presenter. That's how much you take from it. But it took me 10 years, and all the years and all the people that I've seen joining Toastmasters that had anxiety to all kinds of different levels, and hundreds of them I saw, I have never met anybody worse than me. I could have crawled out of there. I could have. I would have never come back, but I stayed, and it changed my life. But
I'm so thrilled that it changed your life. I think that that has been my experience, and it was very surprising to me when I started working with speakers. I thought what I was going to be doing was helping them to become better communicators and to better champion their ideas, which is incredibly important and would have been incredibly rewarding on its own. But what I found is consistently and more often than not, when people become more confident and compelling speakers, it changes so many aspects of their lives. It's transformative. People then get a renewed or sometimes a first time sense of confidence about who they are, about why they're in the world, about their knowledge and their skills and their ability to have a unique perspective on something that other people need to hear. Maybe that's one other person in the world, maybe it's a million, but they have a totally new attitude. You see them walk a little bit taller, smile a little bit bigger, held head a little bit more high, and they start taking on new challenges, bigger challenges. They put themselves out there. They sign up for new roles. They become members of advisory boards. They say, I'm going to apply for that grant, or I'm going to apply for that award, or I'm going to go and see if I can pitch my idea to this enormous, gigantic company that I never would have had the courage or the chutzpah to do before. And suddenly their life is transformed. And it is such a privilege to sit back and watch it. They are the days when I lay my head on the pillow and feel like I just made this enormous difference in the world, because when you work with speakers who have brilliant ideas, either their company, their business, their service, their research, their books, whatever it is, you know, if you help them champion it to the world in a better way, they are going to go and be the change makers. They are going to go and make an enormous difference in the world. And tangentially, in a small part, you've helped that to make that a reality. It's a very good day when it happens.
no question about that, Juanita. So that was in 1990. So I was already 50 years old, and I was successful already in companies, but I didn't feel that way at all. So that was 1990. Then another thing that changed my life was something that happened to me in 1997. I walked into a store here in Prince George, and I picked up a book. I still don't know why I did. And this is the actual book. This is the one. January 1997. Driven to Distraction is the title, written by Dr. Edward M. Hollowell, MD, and it is about ADHD. And I picked it up. I never heard of it. And the more I looked at it, the more I said, oh my God, that's me. And so I wrote in the book, in this one, January 1997, I wrote there, now I finally know who I am. And Dr. Halliwell, medical doctor, dyslexia, ADHD, has written 18 books, 5 of which are about distraction, ADHD issues. And so this changed my life. In addition to going to Canada and then Toastmasters and then this. Now, our podcast is, you are, I think, 326. My podcast 203 is I was able to get Dr. Halliwell on my podcast On the Brink 203. Can you imagine? He wrote this book in 1993. I bought it in Prince George, January 1997, and it changed my life. And so when I had him on my podcast, and he's the expert, not me, although from experience I am, but we talked about that I believed initially that the frequency of occurrence probably around 8% or so, but the more I read about it, the more I Googled and found out about it, is that first I had Exactly. First, I had the stigma attached to it. Can you imagine? I'm building companies, and I go to the bank and I make proposals, and then I said, "Oh, by the way, I got a mental defect called ADHD," and say, "Have a nice day." Go to somebody else. So I was not today, but that's the way it used to be, or I thought it was. Anyway, so when I mentioned to Dr. Halliwell that I believed that the frequency of occurrence is likely more like 20%, he said, "No, John, more than 25%. I agree with him. Now, the other thing that I found in all the things that I've done in business and all the things that I'm involved in now, meeting a lot of leaders and people that are in leadership roles, CEOs, entrepreneurs, and all of those kind of individuals, that I believed, I mentioned to Dr. Halliwell, that at least 50% of them, in my opinion, are ADHD. He said, "No, John, more than 75%. The successful ones." I agree with him. So that's kind of the experience I had with ADHD. And then for me, I believe it is a superpower. And a lot of people say to me, "How do you do all the things that you do? You're a speaker, you've written 5 books, and then you do podcasting, you have 10 different companies, and how do you do it?" I say, ADHD, that's how I do it. And then I felt I had to write a book about it, and so I did. And there's ADHD Unlocked, quite popular actually, and it's written by me from an ADHD perspective. So you can open it any way. You can either go this way or that way. It's always interesting as you read it. And so I'm going to send you copies of my other books as well. Is that the first one that I did? Writing books is not easy, and as you well know. And so a lot of people said to me, "You should write a book about your life because it's so interesting." Now, this was up to about 5-6 years ago. So I was already then in my 70s, and I started and I stopped, I started and stopped, and then I knew if I didn't do it now, then it was about 77, 78 years old, it will not happen. So I started writing. It took me 80 years to live it, 20 years to think about it, 2 years to write it, against all odds. And this one quite popular actually. I'm going to sign a copy, send you one of those as well. And the other ones. And then the last one, I just want to show you this one, because you may find it interesting, is that everybody at some point in life get a shock. And in 2008, I nearly died of diverticulitis, and where we had a rupture, and that's a colon, and I had a breach of it, and the toxins go through your body, and if you don't get something done about it, then then it can kill you. And so I came that close. And so my wife is a vegetarian, and I didn't listen as well to her as I should have. I was not totally abusive, but not as good as I should be. And so I started doing a couple of things after that, is that I was just like the other people like me, is they, at the end of the year, they say, "I'm going to do this, that, and then I'm going to buy a membership to the gym." And then you go for 2 weeks and you can find 100 reasons as why you're much too busy to go there. And so I knew I had to go look after my physical health. So I got a trainer, started training, and that already I was then 58, 64, 60, 65 years old. And after I trained for about 6 or 7 years, somebody came up to us and said, "Hey, John, you ever thought about competing?" And I said, "Me? Yeah." I said, "Well, why not?" So I did. So, and then after a number of years after that, in actually 2017, I started competing in northern British Columbia. Bodybuilding and physique, came in second bodybuilding, third in physique. That qualified me for the provincials. I did the same there, and that qualified me for the nationals and the Arnolds. And so then COVID came, And now again, I'm training at nearly 85. For in 2025, I will be training Andy Arnolds in Columbus, Ohio. And this is what, so I wrote this book about that. Living Young, Dying Old. And it's about diet and fitness. And, so this one came out a number of months ago now, quite popular actually. It's about fitness and staying healthy and diet.
Well, it's wonderful that you have gone from being so uncertain about, oh, maybe I'll write my story, to now having 5 books.
Yeah, yeah, and considering, and the point that I'm making is this one, likely, Juanita, is that even when I failed grade 3 and failed grade 7 3 times, I was very good at numbers and I was a very good writer. But I had ADHD, obviously, and then I had difficulty reading. And, and so the combination of the two obviously was not recognized then as something that needed attention, where fortunately now it is more recognized, but still is something that I'm still vocal about and still needs more recognition, especially in schools and the learning system. And you probably have that experience with your son, right?
Absolutely. So one of my adult sons was in his 20s, was diagnosed ADHD. And similar to you said, when you wrote in that book, I now know who I am. I think it was wonderfully beneficial for him to then, I think he said the equivalent to me of, so much now makes sense, which was wonderful. And I'm biased, but all of my 3 sons are wonderful. The best thing I've ever done is raising 3 fantastic humans. But I agree with you. It absolutely is a superpower. It is one of his superpowers. But also, I work with a lot of people who are very high performing experts at their field. They are founders, entrepreneurs, game changers, and there is a significant prevalence within that group of people who are doing these amazing things and juggling superhuman amounts of tasks, who have said, I have ADHD and that's what helps me do it. So I agree with you. For many people, it can absolutely be a superpower. And it's interesting what you were saying in terms of the dyslexia as well. The people who come to me often for speaker coaching, often they will not initially disclose. They will let me know there's a problem or they're having challenges, whether that's for TEDx or corporate or personally. They're trying to, do book tours, or they're trying to get a new entrepreneurial endeavor up. And they will say to me, look, I need some extra help. And it's really interesting. More and more people will now say from the outset, can you help me? I have dyslexia, or I have ADHD, or I have ADHD dyslexia. But I still have a number of clients who won't tell me in the beginning. That won't be how they open the discussion. And we'll get several sessions in before they feel comfortable enough to disclose it and say, look, I didn't want to tell you in case that meant I couldn't do this speaking gig, or you'd tell me it was impossible. And the thing is, there are so many things we can do. But once they feel comfortable to tell you, it's such a relief when you can say to people, you do not need to be able to read well to be a great speaker. There are so many things we can do. Here are all the strategies, and I'll detail, here are all the things that we're going to do. None of this is going to involve reading. All of our stuff will be one-on-one. Here are all our tricks and tips for people who have that challenge. I also work with people who have acquired brain injuries, who are trying to tell the story of their life, which is often, compelling, heartbreaking, inspiring, and next level. But they can't. They're worried about, their capacity in terms of memorization and other things. I'm like, here are all the tools. There are so many different tools that can be done to help you be an amazing speaker. We just have to find the right ones that work for you. And there's a buffet. There is a menu of options. And so I'm so thrilled when you say that you didn't let any of these things hold you back, and you were living your best life, and you were owning your story, and you were telling it. It fills my heart with joy, because I love seeing that in the people that I work with as well.
You see, and then I say also this, Juanita, is that growing up during the Second World War, saw far too much that we should not have seen, was affected by PTSD, and then also by the inner child, and got counseling for the inner child actually well into my 50s, very emotional. And then, if I look back with all of that and then failing grade 3 and grade 7 3 times, you would have said that I'd be a failure from there on forward. You will never succeed in anything that you do, because in Holland the way it works is that no matter what you do, they say, okay, where are your diplomas? Well, I don't have diplomas. And so, so then through circumstance of meeting the Canadian soldiers that made such an impression on me that I knew I wanted to go to Canada. There was no question. But that changed my life because it allowed me to start over new. The fact of working as a furniture maker and at 13 going into a furniture factory, my dad being in lumber, that gave me the dream of building a mill. That's how I came to Canada. Then coming to Prince George, and then through pure coincidence, my ex-sister-in-law dragged me down to Toastmasters. That changed my life. And then in 1997, through pure circumstance, I found a book. That changed my life. And since that time, if I look now back to when I found the book, I already was 67 years old and 57. And then it took me 5 years before I went to my doc, who was also a personal friend, and delivered our 2 daughters. And he said to me, "Hey, John, why are you here?" I said, "I think I got ADHD." And so we checked it out, and I do, but by then, I was already 62 years old. So from the time I was 13 to the time I was 62, you can pretty much say 50 years, I really didn't know who I was. And it didn't stop me from being successful, but in a lot of cases, it didn't open up the abilities that I had, because once I went to Toastmasters, I'm a very good presenter. I'm a very good keynote speaker because I'm very good at it. And then and so in spite of it all, I have an amazing memory. I'm very good with numbers. And then the next thing I did, I started writing, and I was already then in my 70s. I've done 5 books so far and do virtually one, and then manage 10 companies, and negotiating right now on buying another number of companies actually. And I'm going to be 84 in 2 weeks. And then in the meantime, I'm the oldest competitive bodybuilder in North America. And I'm going to go to the Arnold's in 2025. So what I'm saying is that everything is possible. We need to do this again. So because we got so much more to talk about. The other part, I'm hoping to share with you the book that I'm writing. Before I finish it, I want to share it with you and at least give me a portion of your thoughts that I would be able to include in the book. I would love to do that.
That would be wonderful. I would be very, very happy to do it. And, similar to you, when you talk about, a chance meeting, I would like to think of it as a very wonderful meeting with your heroes, the Canadians, but also with finding your book. I similarly had, a wonderful chance experience, and that same person gave me a book, which changed my life. So maybe we can talk about that another time.
It sounds great. And I'm going to send you my 4 books. I'm going to sign them. Scott will get you the address. And then, Juanita, it was an amazing podcast. Thank you for being on my podcast. And we'll stay in touch. We'll do it again a couple of months from now and to just kind of pick it up where we left.
That sounds wonderful. I look forward to continuing the conversation, John.
Thank you. Take care.